Government has revealed its 10-year plan for a world-class health service for the Irish people. The Slaintecare plan, which looks to radically overhaul the health service, was launched by Minister for Health Simon Harris yesterday, but has already been criticised for failing to provide a clear price tag on how much it will cost over the next decade. Well, joining me with that story and everything else this morning are Johnny Fallon from Carr Communications and Ellen Gunning, Director of the Irish Academy of Public Relations. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Ellen, I'm a bit shocked because we were just having a quick chat there before we came on air, and I said, what did you make of the launch yesterday? What do you make of this action plan, this roadmap that we now have for radically overhauling our much beleaguered health service? And you thought the Minister handled it very well, and you think it's a step in the right direction.
I think he's definitely going in the right direction. There are a number of positives. There are plenty of negatives, but there are a number of positives. I love the fact that he has said these are the 106 items. He's given us the stick to beat him with. These are the 106 items that I'm going to focus on. He said that in 3 months' time, they will actually put a timeline on against each of those items, so we'll know how long it should take for everything to be done. He said that every 6 months there will be feedback, so there'll be a report back every 6 months to say this is us achieving our targets, or this is why we haven't achieved our targets, this is what we've done so far. He said that he's trying to get the health service down to 12 weeks, so everybody would be able to be seen in a hospital within a 12-week period. And interestingly, I saw something yesterday evening which said that they may look at introducing legislation.
Yes, and that's going to be supported on a statutory footing. So if you go to a hospital, you don't get your appointment within 12 weeks, they have breached a statute, and therefore there should be a penalty, a fine, for example, and it would be the hospital themselves or the hospital managers who would be held to account. Great
idea, and apparently this has worked really well in Scotland. It revolutionised the health service there. So I think he's actually moving. He's using a carrot and stick. I think he's moving in the right direction. I like what he's trying to do. I think he's taken his first steps. I think it was a very clever PR move, by the way, that August, the silly month, everybody's on holidays, Dáil isn't sitting, and he says, I will reveal my plan, which is sort of my plan to have a plan in 3 months' time with a timeline. But I think he's going in the right direction.
It was a plan to have a plan that a lot of people criticised because it wasn't costed. I mean, there were elements within it that were costed. The new IT system is costed, for example. The new acute beds have already been assigned a certain budget for them under the National Development Plan. But all of the other 100-odd recommendations, no timeline and no money set aside, and no idea what the budget's going to be.
And I think that part of the reason for that, to be fair, is that as you look at a project at the size of what they have now said they're going to implement in Slaintecare, they really don't know, and nobody does know. To put a cost on it would be to put a figure out there and really pluck it from the air and stick it on it. Because
But do we have an assurance, though, Johnny, even an assurance at this stage, that we have obviously the health budget, the yearly health budget, then we always have the supplementary health budget, as every budget seems to overrun, and that there's going to be a third budget set aside out of government revenue to implement this?
No, and to be quite honest, you know, much and all as government might say that we'll set aside money. Really, when you start implementing, money's a slip between the cup and the lip, you know, and that's what happens in here. It all changes in the implementation. And once the government gets into that space, there's bills are going to go up, some are going to go down, but it'll be mostly going up. Things are going to expense, staff costs, nursing costs, unions, everything else. So there's such a huge amount of implementation. If you think back to when the HSE was introduced and we got rid of health boards, great idea at the start, but how it actually ended up implemented, what we have today is very different from what was originally envisaged with the HSE, but it couldn't be implemented that way. There's no guarantee the Slaintecare will ever be implemented the way we're seeing it today. Now, the Minister has to start somewhere. I think his next job is to try to get out of health as quickly as possible and move on in his career.
And I suppose, though,
implementation in 10 years is very, very difficult.
The idea with this report is that when this Minister leaves, as he inevitably will, that we won't have a new Minister come in and a new report, because this is meant to be the 10-year strategy. It has cross-party supports.
Yeah. And I think one of the crucial differences, one of the positives that is in this, one of the things that has dogged the health service in this country has been that ministers coming each with a different plan. And we saw that with James Riley, where that created big problems, coming in with a different plan and then half implementing that, and then you've half of this system and a bit of that system and a bit of this system over here. This is to try get everything in one system, one plan that everybody agrees on for the future. But how it will be done, whether ministers and governments will be strong enough to implement it. And one thing for sure in the budget, if we still have a government talking about income tax cuts and reducing the tax burden on workers while at the same time implementing Slaintecare, it ain't going to happen.
And one of the big things, and you touched on it there, is that when you're trying to introduce changes within the health system, you have the political aspect, you have the public aspect, and then you have, I suppose, the difficulty in dealing with people who work within the health system and the resistance there. And we've already seen the criticism from the IMO and the IHCA yesterday. And the only time I think you really saw in the last 10 or 15 years was the cancer care strategy and how that was eventually implemented and pushed through. And we saw the difficulties and we saw the controversy and we saw the resistance. And what we needed was real political will and real political leadership. Do we have that here? Particularly, I think, in light of perhaps some of the comments that have come from our Taoiseach, who himself seems, I think, quite fatalistic about our health service and what can be achieved.
This is the real test of whether or not the system works. Roisin Shortall was interviewed yesterday evening. Now, bear in mind, she was the woman who actually chaired the committee that came up with what became the Slaintecare plan. But she actually more or less said it's a step in the right direction. I like the way it's going. Yes, we need a costing on it, but this has cross-party support. And I think this is the real test. Ireland cannot keep coming up with, as Johnny said, a new minister comes in with new broom sweeps clean every time. We can't afford it. It gives us a terrible healthcare system. We actually need the politicians to do what they've said on the tin to actually support this. So instead of having a knockdown, drag-out argument when it comes to the budget, politicians on the opposite side should be saying, has the government provided enough money for this plan that we all want to see implemented for 10 years? I think it'll be very interesting when it comes down to taking the difficult decisions. I don't think it will be a lack of government implementation. I think it will all fall on the opposition.
One of the most controversial aspects of this was the removal of private practice from public hospitals, and there's no mention of that, which makes me wonder, is there the political will to tackle the more difficult aspects of Slaintecare?
Interestingly, I know the VHI are saying things like they will lose, is it 300,000 people if public health care becomes so good that you no longer need private insurance. Which actually seems fair enough.
I wouldn't panic too much, VHI, at this stage.
Neither would I.
I just want to move on to Alcohol Action Ireland. They did their alcohol market review and their price survey, looking at minimum pricing, what you would need to spend, I suppose, in Ireland as a man or a woman to, I suppose, drink your maximum recommended amount of standard units of alcohol. And they're saying, look, the public health, the minimum pricing, minimum unit pricing needs to be brought in. It needs to be expedited. Why the hold-up, Johnny? Why is that bill not being implemented?
Well, I think there's probably, you know, the obvious answer is that there's a lot of lobbying going on, a lot of from different sectors within it. But you also have pressures within that's the retail sector as well as the drinks industry. And look, they always have their own agenda there that has to be part of it. I think there's also a little bit of wariness, though, on the part of politicians here that, you know, we are reaching a critical point in Ireland where anybody who has a drink, and I like a glass of wine at night, one glass, you know, that's it. I stay within my 17 drinks. Thankfully, I'm a man, so I get a few more. So I can stay within that. But I mean, the fact is, you're made feel like a bit of a criminal for having a drink at night. It's like, oh, I'm this terrible person, I have to pay more money, and have to, like, we do have to get to a point where I think, and politicians are beginning to feel some pushback from the public too, that, you know, what is sensible drinking and what is a puritanical approach to actually beating people over the head about, you take a drink, you're an outcast. So I think politicians fear that, but there's undoubtedly a lot of lobbying from retail, from industry, from all that is holding things up. But the Minister has definitely been very strong about pushing it through as far as he can do with this, and has been a leading light on it. But I think there is a wider debate that has to be held there, and just to keep the public on side with it.
OK, we have to leave it there, folks, but thank you for joining us this morning. Plenty more to come on Ireland AM. Back after this short break.